What Once Was Mine, Chapter 14, Rapunzel. The next day, Rapunzel sat on her favorite stool and looked out her window sadly. For the very first time, she actually looked the way she was often envisioned in the minds of fairy tale bedazzled writers. Beautiful, wan, sad, delicate, yearning, stony, unmoving. It was very strange, because as we all know, the real Rapunzel was never still in her 300 square foot of freedom. She rested her head on her hands, arms crossed on the cool ledge, and watched the world go by. Very slowly, plant slowly. She was so sad to even put her thoughts into a painting. She wasn't thinking about how she would never, ever leave the tower, nor was she stewing in disappointment over not getting to see the lights. She also wasn't mourning how her relationship with her mother had become complicated and unpleasant, picking over memories and discussions and trying to see where it had all gone wrong. No. Right then, she was still at the point of pure, undiluted sadness that prohibits all clear thought, distinct ideas, fully realized conclusions, like a waterfall that drowns out all sound. It overpowered all the words in her head. Everything was just terrible. And then, something happened. She almost missed the first few seconds of it, convinced she had invented this something out of her own misery, or that maybe she was finally going mad. A man ran into the clearing. Rapunzel almost pulled back from the window, frightened that he would see her. Apparently he was frightened as well. He kept looking around wildly. Behind himself, to the sides of something terrible was near and unseen. He was being followed, Rapunzel realized, or at least he was scared that someone might be following him. He stopped suddenly, spotting something. A tree? A sick tree with a giant hole in it. Rapunzel frowned, not understanding. The man ran over to the tree and threw something into its hole. Rapunzel leaned forward dangerously, straining to see. It must have been something valuable. The man wasted no time. Having stashed whatever it was, he backed away. He stood still and looked around the whole area slowly and thoughtfully, probably memorizing his location. She took his moment of stillness to study him intently, from an artist's perspective. All she could see was his body at an angle, the top of his head, he had brown hair, and his arms when they were out. They seemed young and muscular and lithe. She wished she could see his face. The way he moved made her think he was probably handsome. She couldn't have said why, nor did she bother to differentiate think from hope. The man ran to the base of the tower and touched it curiously. Then he disappeared out of her view, circling around the wall. There might have been some scuffling noises, a strange wooden crunch. Rapunzel almost shrieked with frustration. What was he doing? But even the frustration was exciting. Nothing like this has happened in any of her 19 years. She had actually seen people a few times before this. A lost child, a confused shepherd, a dangerous-looking man with a sword and a bow, but they all immediately hurried away from her in the tower, as if they knew the dangers it contained in the moment they saw their eyes upon it. The man reappeared, running from the other way. He had gone all the way around the tower, and was now missing his jacket. Strange. He stood, posed, hands on hips, as if very pleased with himself, and then ran off, in a slightly different direction from which he had entered the clearing. Rapunzel's heart raced. She gripped the window frame. The man might have left, possibly forever, but whatever he had stashed was still in the tree. Either he was going to return for it later, or someone else would. Maybe it would be whoever was following him. Maybe an enemy. Maybe a co-conspirator. If she watched long enough, perhaps, she could see the denouement of this intriguing mystery. But Rapunzel was tired of watching and waiting. She thought about the hidden something in the tree, and how she very, very much wanted to see what it was, to hold the mystery in her hand, to solve a birthday present. In her excitement, her thoughts were a little muddled. But it was her birthday, and she was sad and disappointed, and, well, this would go a long way to fixing things. Lunch that afternoon should have been a dreary affair. She and her mother sitting across from one another, not speaking, or rather, Gothel making fictitious and laborious attempts at light conversation, while Rapunzel presented a very un-Rapunzel-y sad wall of silence. But now energy bubbled up from her hair to her toes and rosied her face, and she almost danced in her seat when the stirrings of hope. "Well, I'm so glad to see you in a better mood," Gothel said archly, somehow sounding like she didn't mean it at all. They were having leftover chicken with some additions, mushrooms and herbs she had brought with her from the forest. Whatever else you could say about Gothel, she was a darn good cook with whatever she had at hand. Of course I would hate to leave with you all gloomy and sulky like a ghost with bad digestion. Either way, I still have to leave, get things done at the family farm, all the usual, but it's certainly nicer this way. I still want to see the floating lights, Rapunzel said, both telling the plain truth and trying to draw out the argument that would have been natural. Gothel rolled her eyes. No. No, no, you're a danger to others, and you can't be trusted to keep yourself under control, she said matter-of-factly, almost sounding bored. Rapunzel kept her head low over her dish, trying not to giggle. She was not good at disassembling. She had never learned how. After dinner, the two cleaned up side by side, life as usual for them. Their movements were almost synchronized, and they had no need to talk. Although the washing was boring, an endlessly repeated task, Rapunzel almost wished that moment could have gone on a little longer. No talking meant no fights, and no end to the dishes meant that she wouldn't do what she was about to do. When she did that thing, when she left the tower, their relationship would change forever. Rapunzel would have an experience, a secret from her mother, something new in 19 years. She would be different. And maybe it was about time, but it was also a little frightening. Gothel was humming to herself a little song about a flower gleaming and glowing. It was one of Rapunzel's favorites. Her mother had been singing it ever since she was a baby. When the plates and pots were clean and dried, Gothel packed her basket, and Rapunzel uncoiled her longest, thickest braid of hair. "Darling, you know I hate disappointing you," the older woman said, touching her daughter's cheek before climbing up the window. "It's just the way things are." Rapunzel nodded, not trusting her mouth. She looked outside to the forest, to the dark trunk with the hole in it, which was growing blurry and obscured with the first flicks of shadow. "Is it safer for someone to travel by herself at night?" she asked, curious. "What an odd question," Gothel said, amused and suspicious at the same time. "I am not most woman, Rapunzel. Fortunately for you and me. Oh, here, I almost forgot. Happy birthday, darling." She reached into her cloak and pulled out something so surprising Rapunzel's jaw actually dropped. It was a bright red bracelet, one of the most beautiful and cheerful things she'd ever seen. It didn't match any of her clothes or other accessories, and that was wonderful. It looked like fire, and the tongue of a cat in one of her books. Or maybe it was a dog. And a really good sunset in autumn, happiness in a color. There was even a cheery many-rayed sun in the clasp. It was one of Rapunzel's favorite symbols, one she painted again and again everywhere in the tower, in her favorite color, too. "Mother, it's beautiful, thank you!" She threw her arms around Gothel and squeezed tight before the other woman could react. Maybe the woman didn't love Rapunzel's hugs. Maybe she was too strict. Maybe she was a little domineering. Maybe sometimes she said things she probably didn't mean, but it was obvious, in her own broken way, that Rapunzel's mother loved her. This bracelet was proof. She had remembered it was her birthday all along. "I love you, Rapunzel," her mother said. "I love you more," Rapunzel said back. "I love you most." And with that, Gothel leapt down the rope of hair and disappeared into the night.